Hey Mike, so how do you convince a Bigfoot skeptic that Bigfoot's an actual real creature and not something that's not real?
Well, I don't know that I do convince them. I do have people who come in the museum who do tell me that when they walked in here, they were pretty much a skeptic, and then by the time they leave, they feel like they're more on the fence. They're less skeptical. So I think I do have some things I can say that does sort of stand up for the possibility. And all I do is I just logically go through the steps. So if you start with what's the first step, you look at, you're talking about the existence of a creature. We're talking about the flesh and blood Bigfoot. That's the one everybody's most interested in. So if we're going to prove that there's a flesh and blood Bigfoot, then we have to have, and if we don't have the corpse itself, which is the ultimate proof for science, and that's the one that's going to nail it, or at least part of it, you see, then we have to come up with other stuff that backs it up. So if you look at the prehistory of the subject, does Bigfoot exist in prehistory? Well, what's prehistory? That's the fossil record. And does Bigfoot exist in the fossil record? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, there are more fossil examples of Bigfoot-type anthropoid apes than there are of anthropoid apes in the fossil record that are similar to modern chimpanzees and gorillas. In other words, modern chimps and gorillas are very poorly represented in the fossil record over the last 100,000 to 200,000 or 300,000 years. We only have a couple of teeth of a chimpanzee. We have half a skull of something that we think was the ancestor of the orangutan. We have a thing called Gigantopithecus that is represented by 2,000 teeth and 3 mandibles, and that's it. So a lot of what we know about those things is speculative to begin with. But we do have plenty of proof in the fossil record of Bigfoot-type creatures in the past. I mean, if somebody saw what scientists call Australopithecus, which was an ape-like creature that were as little as 3 or 4 feet tall to up to 7, 8 feet tall, these things running around in the forest today, we would describe them as a Bigfoot, you know. So, bingo. I point to the fossil record, so it's in prehistory. And then in the historical record, that would be in the oral and written traditions of human beings, because that's where our written history comes from. That's where history is made, through the mouths and stories of human beings. And definitely, the Bigfoot phenomenon goes clear back to the beginnings of oral tradition and written tradition. We find Chinese manuscripts with bestiaries that include indigenous animals, and amongst them we find Bigfoot-type creatures described as being useful, their body parts being useful to cure certain diseases and things like this. We find biblical references to hairy people, to giants and hairy giants, and so on and so forth. There's ancient vases from the Greeks that have hairy wild men on them. There are etchings from the Middle Ages of knights fighting with hairy wild men. So yes, in the both oral and written tradition of humanity, we have just countless references to hairy wild men ever since day one. Okay, so there's the history, the prehistory. Then the modern is the modern sighting reports. That's our current history. That's our contemporary proof of Bigfoot. And we have, of course, tens of thousands of these reports that have been gathered from over time by different researchers in the form of databases that are available, many of which are available online now. You can log on and read these reports on a daily basis, and it'll take you years to read them all. So we have these tens of thousands of eyewitnesses. Now, then to back up eyewitnesses, we have all this other corollary cognate types of evidence. For example, we have physical body parts. We've got, for example, in our museum we have a tooth here that we believe is attributable to a Bigfoot. We haven't had the proper test done to nail it yet, So we're making that suggestion now, and if anybody wants to come and prove our tooth is not a Bigfoot tooth, I welcome them. If they'll cover the cost to have that done, that would be wonderful. But there's also lots of hair samples that have been taken. There's all these footprints that have been left behind and cast, and although amongst those are some fakes, there's some pretty convincing ones amongst those footprints too. And there's just so many of them that it would be almost ludicrous to suggest that all of those footprints were fakes. But that's what they have to be if the skeptical community is correct. Every single footprint of a Bigfoot has to be a fake, a deliberate fake. Anyway, we've got lots of people who've looked at those who have expertise pertaining to footprints who think that some of them are darn real. Then you have the Patterson film. Here's a couple of eyewitnesses, two cowboys, who not only witnessed a Bigfoot and substantiated that between the two of them, but they also cast its footprints. They filmed each other casting the tracks, filmed each other hunting for the Bigfoot. They had people at the film site the day before and the day after who can testify the tracks weren't there and the tracks were there, and when they were and weren't there, and so forth. So we have plenty of things to back up that film, and on and on. I mean, there are so many things that we have that, at least on a circumstantial level, add up to the existence of a Bigfoot, including things that people have discovered that apparently have been altered or changed by a Bigfoot, like a tree that's been snapped, or a branch that's been twisted, or trees and tree limbs and sticks that have been put together in configurations that seem to be expressing some kind of a message, like their little guideposts and little trail markings and things like this. People have had experiences involving what appears to be the Bigfoot attempting to communicate, utilizing things like feathers, rocks, sticks, and even some vocalizations. We have recorded vocalizations which cannot be explained and don't seem to match up very well with known animals, although some of these things are probably known animals. There's always going to be these little bits of information and little bits of evidence that are either hoaxed and unreal and were purposely done, and there's going to be stuff where people have made mistakes and they haven't done their homework, and where people's imaginations have gotten carried away. And all of this stuff happens because we've experienced that in 6 years of Bigfoot research. Every aspect, every single explanation that the academic community puts forth to explain away Bigfoot, we have seen examples of it here. So I can testify that that does happen. People do commit hoaxes, people do make mistakes and misidentify things. And people do imagine things, and people also make up stories and tell wild tales just to get attention from other people. This all happens. But see, none of that negative stuff explains away the Patterson film, the good plaster casts that have been studied by people who are experts, the hair samples that have been collected, and right now there's DNA that's being tested in a laboratory, in more than one laboratory, and there's quite a few samples now that have been collected across the United States and some from other countries. So that being the case, pretty soon we're going to have to deal with this unknown primate DNA, and we're not going to be able to continue to ignore it. And it's going to be interesting to see what the scientific community does with the information that we have unknown primate DNA that's been sequenced now repeatedly in laboratories.